So thanks for joining this morning. For me, it's this morning. We're going to run through our P6 calculator, and we're going to focus on how our P6 calculator, in conjunction with P6, can help you do more costing inside of P6. Okay, so I'm going to run through that specific topic with our calculator. So I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm the founder and CEO of Emerald, and today I'm actually joining you from Montreal. We're going to run through why we built this. So we have many clients who use P6, usually in an integrated system. So they're integrated to their ERP or asset management, and they are able to go beyond just scheduling in P6. So several years ago, Oracle did a survey with their clients, and they discovered that 100% of users use scheduling. No surprise there. 80% of users also use the resource component. And then only 30 to 40% were using the cost component. So there's a gap as to the potential use of P6 on the costing side as a result of that. Now, usually that's probably because maybe it's too much work to try and capture all the costs against the activities. That might be the thought process. But particularly if you're in an integrated system, there's a lot of interesting things that you can do. If you align your resource pool with your cost accounts with what you've got in your asset management. So that can be pretty interesting. So I thought I'd ask real quick, and if you want to answer, go ahead. Are you in an integrated environment or not? So more and more of our clients are integrating their P6 with their other systems. Now, it totally depends on your environment. If you're using P6 on a one-off project, that may be less interesting. But if you're more of a corporate environment where you've got all your projects in, that's probably more interesting. So that's one thing to consider. Is there potentially some benefits to doing costing? One of the benefits is some consistency and the ability to monitor projects against one another. So that's something that can be a benefit if you move in this direction. Also, as I mentioned, integration, forecasting, that really can be pretty interesting when you're using a costed environment inside P6. Now, some people are worried that the effort is too great, and it might be. It depends on your situation. But project development can come in a few different ways, and I'm going to show you a mini example, because it's just for the demo purpose, of how you can get data in using calculator to do the heavy lifting inside of P6 to do some costing. So I'm going to show you that. And the potential benefits is not only getting data from other systems so that you have more of a complete overview of what's going on inside of P6. That's dynamic, right? Because of course with P6 your dates are changing. And then the benefit is also getting it out to report. A nice consistent reporting. And in most of our clients, they use our P6 reporter component as well. So that gives them snapshots of the data that you can put out to something like a Power BI. So those are things to think about as to where some of the potential could be as I'm running through an overview of how you can use this morning. So let's just take another quick question here. What parts of P6 are you using? So this is sort of the same pool that Oracle did many years ago. And just curious how far along people are, okay? And it really depends on your particulars, but having costing in there can be quite interesting. Okay, excellent. So let's look at what else could be a struggle to putting costing into P6. So updating is usually one of the areas that people struggle with, period. Whether you're using costing or not, how to get your updates in quickly, efficiently, regularly, more regular. Okay, so we still have many clients that are monthly reporting, which in this day and age, how can we not get to weekly, every 2 weeks? And when you're in a turnaround outage kind of situation, you know, you're looking at daily at minimum and potentially twice a day at the end of each shift. So having a way to get your updating in, streamlining calculations, that sort of thing, I'm going to show you some examples there. And then, of course, making sure that the extended team is seeing the information. This is the key, right? We don't want to run P6 in a vacuum. There's no point in that. The whole point of using P6 is to get the data out so everyone's working towards the same goals on a daily basis. So that's the key. So the benefit really of what we can do with P6-Calculator is it just does so many automations. And I'll show you some examples as I walk through. Okay, so things like roll downs and roll ups, calculations. I'm going to show you multi-currency in this example. I'm going to run through how it works specifically. Now you got to look at this webinar as food for thought. Okay, so these are some different ideas that we've done with different clients. Your specifics may be a little different. So that's where Calculator, really the way it works is you develop what your calculations need to be. We get them programmed into the infrastructure we've already got. Okay, so it makes putting them together much quicker. We've already got some foundational items, like I mentioned, roll downs, roll ups, and some base automations to copy things across to different levels in P6. Okay, so I'll show you those in action. And the idea is just to do the heavy lifting so you don't have to have your team doing that out in Excel or with different programs, etc. So we build it right into P6. From a user perspective, Calculator doesn't have its own interface. It's all happening in P6. Okay, so I'm going to jump in and I'm going to start to show you some different scenarios, and we'll touch on how some of the foundational items work inside of P6 with P6 Calculator. Sorry, I'm just about to use loader, so I was about to say the wrong thing. Okay, so let me share my screen and let's give you an overview of where we're at. So hopefully you can see P6, and I'm going to use 3 projects here today. So the first project is an empty project. It's ready for an upload. Okay, so it has no activities in it, and I'm actually going to switch to a different layout so we can jump in and show loading from scratch into an empty project. Okay, so first thing you would be doing when you're working with costing is you're going to get some information from your estimating team. So the kind of information that you're going to want to get is a list of activities with some information about what you're going to need to actually perform those activities. So resource assignments and expenses. Those are the 2 areas that P6 uses to do costing. So let me actually open the second project, and then we'll come back to that empty project just to give you a bit better lay of the land. So I'm in this second project and I've got some activities. So very simple. This is not meant to be a real example. It's just meant to give you something so you can understand what we're doing here with costing. Okay, Someone is saying they can't see the screen. Hopefully most of you can. If you can't see the screen, you might want to refresh on your side. See if it's just a delay. But I think I'm sharing. According to what I can see, I'm sharing. So let me know if others are not seeing it. So try a refresh. That little icon, reload this page, or an F5 usually should do the trick. Okay, so let's talk about the two areas where we can put costs into P6. So we have resources and we have expenses. Those are our two components that allow you to manage costs. Now, the weakness with resources, so let's look at resources here. So when we look at resources, what we have out of the box is one resource can have up to 5 different prices. Now, potential problem with that is that may not be good enough. Depending on your role, your company's role, if you're working in different parts of the world, if you're working in different parts of your own country, potentially like in Canada, you may well have completely different rates required. So the 5 available rates may not be good enough. Okay, so one of the things that we did with some of our clients is we extended the rate structure and allowed you to put additional rates. So I'm going to clear these rates just so you can see the idea here. Okay, so these rates, I'm going to clear them out and I'm actually going to reload them. So what I did here is we have different rates and each rate is going to be per project. Okay, so the idea here is we can have a broader grid of rates that is specific to each project and managed by that project. So that's something that is lacking in P6. So we're adding, using out of the box functions, if you will, to expand what you can do inside of P6. So each project can have their own set of rates, as well as other things that you want to use to go from your cost. So let's say it cost me $1 to have this project manager on the job. Okay, let's just use something ridiculous. So $1. Now, that's the cost. Obviously, we want to sell that project manager's time at a higher rate. So the higher rate could include a margin, it could have an overhead, it could be profit, it could be taxes. It doesn't really matter what additional pieces you need to come up with your sell price. Okay, so you can mix and match, and that's what I'm trying to show you here. So the idea is we're going to have a standard rate, and then we're going to have some additional percentages that we're going to use to make additional calculations. And they can be what you want to track. So it could be taxes, as I said, it could be some overhead, profit. The idea is they're going to total off the cost and come up with the sell, or vice versa. So in this example, we're going to give you the sell rate. So let's say we're selling that project manager at $2 an hour. That means our taxes and our margin might be a certain percentage, and it's going to calculate the cost. So this is something that's a struggle in the P6 structure right now because we don't have that readily available. So from our team who's doing the estimating, we want them to give us, in this case, the resource information. So that's what they need to give us. So it's pretty simple. It's not a very big lift. They need to provide what is the sell rate, so what did they use to calculate, and then what do we want to use for any components that we want to use off the sell to come up with the cost. Okay, you could do it the other way too. If it's easier for your team to have the base cost, put that in, put the taxes and the margin on top to come up with the sell, you could work it that way. Okay, so in this example, we worked it the opposite, but either way can work. So we're going to load this. Now this is our P6 loader. Okay, so this is another tool that we've made to add on to P6 to allow you to load off of Excel. Okay, so this is the format of what you have to send into the resource dictionary. Now, the other layer that we use is expenses. Whoops, so let me just go to P6 and show you some expenses. Okay, so when you're on an activity, you can also have expenses. Now, same thing, we, out of the box, we can only put in one cost component. So it's the, whatever you want the cost calculation to be. So it could be the cost, it could be the sell. So what we've done here is we've expanded that to allow you to show the two different components. Again, we're using, in this example, overhead and profit percentages to make the difference between these two. Now, each one of these is rolling up. Okay, so we have the sell, we have the cost, and we're totaling those up and pushing them up the food chain. Now that's a tool that we built into the P6-Calculator to automatically do all these calculations, because P6 out of the box will not take a field on the resources and on the expenses, total those up, and then total them at the WBS, and total them on the activity, total them on the WBS, total them on the project. It does not do that automatically with the UDFs. Okay, so this is something we've created as automatic roll up, roll down capability. Now, excuse me, the way that we automate this is, you can see we've got this special character set. So we've got two brackets and a caret symbol, which lets P6-Calculator know to do an automatic roll up. Okay, so it happens automatically. So if I add a field and I label it that way, the computer knows to roll them up automatically. So this is something we can deploy very, very quickly. So when I'm creating a brand new project, this is what I need from the estimating team to load expenses. So it's very simple way of getting the data. So this is something you can standardize. Okay, so with our clients using these tools, it's all standardized across the two groups. So when I'm estimating a project and when we win it, we load the sheet very quickly from one system to the other. Okay, that way you can kick off your project very quickly. Now in this sheet, I've also got the activities that we're using, and we have the WBS. Okay, so this is the framework that you need to get from your estimating team. So I can load that up. I can load that up into P6, and I'm going to use our P6 loader to do that. Okay, now if you don't have P6 loader, you can look at the imports. Generally, the imports won't have as much functionality, not even close to what P6 loader has. And some of you may choose to use like an integration from your ERP type system. So that's another strategy that can be used. Okay, so I'm just using the most typical that our clients use. They usually have our P6 loader to load the data up. Now I'm going to load into that empty project. So I'm going to go back to that project. And we'll load this from scratch. So you can see right now I don't have any projects in there. Any activities in this project. And I'm going to load it up. So I'll just have this one ready. And there's no filters, so it's not a trick. I'm going to show it live in action. So I'm just going to go to my P6 loader, and I'm going to upload, and I'm going to go look for that Excel file. So this is it. And I can upload it, and off you go. So this is going to add the WBS, add the activities, add the resource assignments, add the expense assignments, and also update the resource dictionary. Okay, so this is a simple example. So it only has 2 activities. The idea was not meant to represent total reality here. It's just to keep it simple, to explain the ideas of what we can do here. So we loaded those 2 activities. We've got their durations on there, and we've got resources and expenses that were loaded in. Okay, now what else? Well, we know we loaded up some rates for those resources. So I had cleared them just a minute ago so you could see them, and now they're back. Okay, so that's all loaded. So now what we do is we tell P6-Calculator to go ahead and calculate using all that data that we sent in. Now, we have it set up so it's a manual control, which I think makes sense here, so that the scheduler can say when they're ready to have it run. Okay, so all I need to do is save that and refresh it, and it'll start doing its thing. Now, some of you may be interested in costing in P6, but you have multi-currency to handle. So this is another thing that we've tackled with P6-Calculator. So we have many clients that need multi-currency capability, but P6 is not that strong on it because you get to put in one exchange rate, and that's not usually nearly enough in terms of detail for exchange rates. So that's what you're seeing here. So in this example, I have my currency for my ledger, for my company. Think of it that way, as Canadian. So I'm in Canada, my reporting, corporate reporting is in Canadian. But this project might be a US project. So this is a project currency. So it could be a US project. So I also need to work in US dollars. I need to work in both because when I'm communicating with the client, I need to communicate in US, but when I'm communicating with my corporate management, I need to convert everything to Canadian. So we've built that in, and I just ran that as part of the calculator. So you should have seen that these dollar amounts came in there, and the Canadian dollar amounts came in there as well. So this project is a $210,000 Canadian project, converted to American. Right now at a 1.32, it's 159. Okay, now we're converting not only the sell rate, so what we've agreed with the client, but also our cost rates. So we've got those there being calculated through the overhead and profit components that were calculated. Now, in this example, we have an overhead and profit at the project level. So if you have a simple structure for your overhead and profit, that's just a standard across, that works. But some of our clients have a much more complicated overhead and profit, margin and taxes. It's the same thing that they might use. Okay, so we have also the ability to override it and have a different value for each resource if you wish. Okay, so you can mix and match as appropriate. So you start with the project, but if there's anything at a more detailed level, so in this case at the resources, that's going to win. That's going to override. Now, where does all this data go? Where is it being used? So let's go back to the activities. So on each of the activities, we have different resources. Now in this example, I've got labor, equipment, as well as materials. So this can work on any resource type. And inside there, I have the ability to see my sell rate. So that's the 333 that we saw there. Now, there could be a scenario where I need to overwrite that, okay? So again, we've got overrides available to the team everywhere inside the system, the P6 calculator system that we put in place. Because there could be times where this is not what we want to use as the rate. So we've put that in, and now the calculations would take place against this rate, okay? So the overhead, the profit, the margin, or tax, those fields are synonymous in this example. I've just put different titles just to give you some ideas. They can all come into play. So I've made a change. So one of the rates could be higher, one of the rates could be lower. The idea is this gives you some flexibility. So if I want to change the rate, I can, and I just rerun the calculator. Okay, so again, I just can do this as many times as I wish. And it will recalculate this and recalculate the values. Now it's going to recalculate the project values, which in my example are American USD, and the ledger values, so the Canadian values as well. So it's going to recalculate everything. So this brings a huge amount of flexibility to how you work P6. Now we store those values, and these values can be rolled up. Okay, so let me explain that a little bit better. So we have overhead and profit on the expenses. We have overhead and profit on the resources. And those values, as you can see here, are getting rolled up. So we can see the totals across. Again, it doesn't have to be overhead and profit. It can be whatever you wish. But the idea is we're splitting the sell price to the cost, the overhead and profit. We're seeing that at both levels. We're bringing them together, and we're seeing the totals. And those totals can go all the way up to the project level. Okay, so we're seeing those reported to the top. So this gives you a lot of nice flexibility on how you slice and dice different costing. Now, let's go back to those and just take a look at what happens. So I changed those values. These were recalculated based on this new value, not the 333 standard that I had put in. So off the new value. And that has an automatic ripple effect to these values on the roll-up. Okay, so that's one angle. Some of you might have multi-currencies even more detailed than this. Okay, so this is essentially everything's being run in US dollars, and I'm reporting Canadian dollars. And I've got the flexibility to change the rates, to change the overheads and profit calculations, and the computer P6 calculator will do all that heavy lifting. You might also have a situation where you have multiple currencies that you deal with, meaning you buy in many currencies. So particularly, let's say you're a manufacturer or your project is procuring items from all around the world. All of those will be trickier for you to manage. So let me show you some ideas on things we've done with other clients. So in this particular example that I'm going to open up, I have multiple currencies. So let me just jump back to that project window. So I have multiple currencies. So this example is a Canadian company, and we're buying items in other parts of the world. So we have to pay in US dollars, euros, pounds, etc. Okay, so all these different currencies are needed for this particular project. Now, you can add, the way that we set up P6 Calculator, you could add additional currencies. So it's looking for a certain format again. So you can see the way that we name the field is the key. So if you added an FX dash different currency, it would automatically pick it up. So again, there's some smarts already built in, so it's very flexible for you to use it and start executing on it. Now, this client also had some very intricate costing related to extra charges for items it was purchasing. So in this example, you can see here we have brokerage, we have freight, we have handling, and we have different kinds of brokerage, freight, handling for different cost accounts because they're different kinds of items. So they're large items, etc. So you can see we've got different percentages, all sorts of calculations. Now we have other clients that had a similar type of need, but it was on a resource. So when they received a crew, so their estimates were done by crew. So this crew, type of crew, was going to need 20 hours. Well, the problem with working a crew is that doesn't necessarily separate out, let's say, your carpenters to your laborers, pipe fitters, etc. So they knew that certain crews had certain complements. So 5% were, let's say, the foremen, let's say 20% were carpenters, and let's say, what's that, 75% were laborers, let's say. So we've also done that kind of work where we receive a crew and we split the resource. Okay, so I'm going to show you this concept, but I'm going to use the costing. So I'm going to show you the expense. So let me jump in to that and try and explain that a bit more. So this is the framework. This is the dictionary, if you will. And then P6-Calculator is smart enough to know what to do with this. So it's in terms of the maintenance, it's very light. Okay, so let's just go to a different layout. So the fields are already ready, and we can run through this. Okay, so let's look at these examples. So I'm going to look at two activities. I'm going to look at one that is more of a labor type of activity. So we're doing work, and it's mostly labor. So that's this example. So let me try and explain this. So what we have here is we have our estimate. So these first few lines are the estimate of the work that we need to do. And this is expenses, okay? So let's also go to the labor. Okay, I'm on the wrong activity. Let's go to this activity for the labor. Okay, so let's start with the simple one and we'll go back to the expenses because that one is a bit more complicated. So let's start with the simple one. So we have our estimating team gave us either through Excel with P6 Loader or through an integration or whatnot, that we need 3 different roles. These are the 3 roles for this project management. So we've got material control, ops management, project management. These are the roles. They've given us the rate, and then they've given us the number of hours. Okay, so pretty simple. So very simple upload as well. Now, that's on the labor. So let's take a look at the procurement. So that's the one I was on. So this is the expenses. Now, they've also given us that we need to go and buy these different items. Okay, so some of the items are in US dollars that we need to go buy. Some of the items might be in Canadian. And then some of the items are smaller ticket items. So you can see it's a smaller component and they've got different cost coding for that. The same thing, they've got additional items. So this is their structure, okay? Their labeling of their cost accounts. So, you know, this is, every client's gonna have a slightly different twist. So in their example, they had it bundled by whether it was a large item or small item in terms of dollar amount. Okay, that's how they did their cost accounting. So small items had certain brokerage, freight, and handling, and larger items had a different percentage, okay, which makes sense. Hopefully on the larger items, the brokerage fees are a smaller percentage. So that's how they had it. So that's why this looks a little complicated. We have quite a few lines that we get on the estimate. Now, you can see that they've anticipated in the estimate that some of the items we need to buy from the US. So we don't want to have to calculate manually the exchange rates. We don't want to have to do that every time. So Calculator is doing it automatically. So this line and this line get calculated automatically when Calculator sees that the currency is not a Canadian currency. It automatically calculates the variance or the FX rate and puts it in this exchange rate column. Now, the benefit of that is we can see that exchange rate column in our layout at the activity level, and we can see that rolled up to the whole project. So right away, as we're looking at this project, we know we have some risk. When you have to do foreign exchange rate, you have some risk. So this is highlighting that risk. And in this case, it's totaling it up, what the expected exchange rate exposure is. We could also add columns that specifically show it the US dollar versus other currencies separate. Okay, so there's lots of functionality built in that's automatic. Now, let me try and explain what this looks like if you get an estimate from scratch and you don't have these already in here. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of these and I'm going to rerun Calculator to show it to you live. Okay, so in this example, it looks like we have not only Canadian, we also have euros and US dollars in this example. So we're going to procure things in those two different currencies. So let me just make sure I've refreshed it and let me go and run P6-Calculator on this. So you can see it actually live in action. So I'm going to tell it to go ahead and run it to do the calculations. So it's going to use these exchange rates and it's going to use these brokerage, freights, handling, etc. Oops, and I'll go back to the expenses. So it just takes a minute and I'll just refresh it and we should see those lines reappear that I deleted. So it might take a minute, more than a minute, just depending on the frequency. P6-Calculator is running automatically in the background and it's just watching for this signal to run on this project, this go that you're seeing there. Okay, so it's going to do its thing. Just give it a minute. And when it does, what you're going to see is those lines are going to come back and they're going to be lines for the exchange rate. They're going to be lines for those additional add-on, automatic add-ons that we want, the freight, the brokerage, the handling. Okay, we'll just wait. And it should just take another minute. Now, you could use this for other things, okay? So we're not limited to the way that we've done it. This is meant for food for thought, okay? So some of the things that might have caused you not to use costing in P6, hopefully we've tackled it already or something similar. Okay, so those lines have reappeared. So let me try and explain what we're seeing here. So we're seeing some exchange rate calculations so that we've got the exchange rate values available. And you need those because you want to be able to see what your exposure is. So that's an important one. And then, of course, as I mentioned, depending on the formulas, we have brokerage, we have freight, we have handling that'll come automatically. So the idea here is now we're also capturing the costs appropriately. Okay, so we're gathering all the costs that we expect on the project, and we're allowing the forecasting to take place against those. So let's look at updating, because updating can always be a challenge. So let's look at updating. So I'm going to go back to the labor example, okay, and I'm just going to look at that for updating. Okay, so let's look at our original starting point. Okay, so our starting point was 3 roles. We had material control, ops management, and project management. Now, the challenge we always have is, okay, well, we estimated we had 3 roles, but the reality can be that we have more different people with different roles who actually do the work. So how do we merge those very, very quickly? How do we get something that works very quickly without me having to do all sorts of calculations and managing values at what I would call the summary or the estimated line, plus all the detailed actual lines? We don't want to have to do all that manually, because that's a lot of work. So that's something that we tackled with P6-Calculator for these examples with the costing. So let me jump to a forecasting, just so you can look at. Actually, I think I'll jump back. I don't think this has all the fields I want to show. So actually, I'll stay in this layout instead. So what we want to do is we have our estimated labor. Now, those estimates are for 3 roles, and those were put into the P6 out of the box fields. Okay, great. Now, how do we manage the updating? Well, in this example, it's an integrated example. So we actually got timesheets. So these different people, Tara, Daryl, Cindy, Scott, Tracy, they actually put timesheets in against this activity. Now, not all of them are the role. It's conceivable, that not all of them are the roles that are there. So that's possible. This example, they happen to match the roles. So if we look at the roles, you can see that we had 150 hours of material control, and Tara, Daryl, and Tracy fit that bill, so they work in that group. And then for production technician, we've got Mitchell, etc. Now, we need the actual hours and the estimate to complete off the 150. We need these 4 to work together. Okay, so that's something we've tackled with this calculator add-on. It's going to work together so that the estimate at completions will work properly, automatically. That's the key here. So the only part that's not automatic is the project manager. We need somebody to give us what is left. So that would be the estimate to complete, or what is left in total, the estimate at completion. We need somebody to let us know what that is. So that's where our CAPS tool could come into play. You could do it in a meeting with them. There's lots of different ways to gather the at completion. Now, in this example, the at completion that the PM gave us was 170. So they're actually expecting this to take more hours than the 150 that we had originally estimated. Now, in this example, we had 200 estimated, and the at completion is 110. So that looks like that's going to come in better. And then in this example, it's looking worse. Okay, so it can be better or it can be worse, just depending on your particulars. Now, You could also, depending on how you do your updating, okay, you could also use the estimate to complete. So this is the remaining. Now, that could be a higher or lower value as well. Okay, so you could use either one, and then you should see this get recalculated. So I'll save that and I'll run the calculator again, just so we can get the idea of how this can work. Let me go back and I'll run it. And it's the forecasting piece. So in this client, we've got two different go buttons, just to make it very crystal clear that one is for the estimate, one is for the forecasting. Okay, so there's lots of different ways to deploy this. So we're going to look for this go to switch to pass, and then we should see some recalculations. Now, while it's doing that, we can go to the procurement one. Okay, so the one that we were looking at a minute ago for the expenses. Okay, so the same thing would be needed for the expenses. So we've got our estimate. So those are these fields. So this is the estimated cost. We've got any foreign exchange rate, and we've got the totals taking place. Now, those values are put into the P6 fields. So these are calculated and they make up the budget. But then we start to have some sort of incurred to date. Now, this client is an example of an integrated system. So we're actually getting their incurred to date from their accounting system. Okay, and we've done many accounting systems. We've done old ones like AS400 types. We've done SAP, JD Edwards, Oracle Fusion, Oracle Financials, Discoverer. We've done many. Okay, so the idea here is we're gathering up the purchase orders, we're gathering up their incurred to dates, and we're putting those in. Now, if you've ever tried to do costing, you know that because I have an invoice, that's not necessarily really what my actual accrued value should be, okay? Because I might know that 3 or 4 vendors haven't sent their invoices in, but we've received the equipment and we want to track that, okay? So you do want to give your project manager on the expense side some fields as well to put in the at completion and or the estimate to complete. And you may also want to allow them to put in the actual that they want to carry, okay, which can be different than the incurred to date. So that flexibility is there. Same sort of process. We want to allow forecasting, okay? So we want the values to be able to go up or down just depending on the requirement. So when we have that sort of scenario, again, you could use our CAPS tool because we can expose that field to the PM. So it's a very simple user interface that they can do the updating in. And then, or you can do it in Excel. You can do it many ways, okay? So totally your choice on how you want to handle that. Then what you want to do is you want to have a way of flagging very quickly for your scheduler, whether you're up, down, whatnot, okay? So really important to have some nice flagging because that way you can filter on those and see very quickly where you're at. Okay, so let's just see if this finished up. And then we can take a quick look at the resources. And that's this one, the updating, and we'll go back. So based on the values that I put in here, it's going to recalculate the estimate to complete. It's going to give you whether you're up or down. So you can see the variance, which is important because, of course, that has impact on where you're going to end up and an impact on whether you're going over or you're under. Very important to be monitoring that. and it will also impact your productivity calculations that you're seeing based on the percent completes achieved today. So you've got to keep the updating simple. You've got to have the calculator do most of the heavy lifting, and you need a lot of flagging so you can see what's going on. So that's really some of the crux of what you want to do when you're implementing a cost components. And integrate, if you've got integration capability, that's a good one to use as well. So one of the things you also becomes a challenge is on the materials and the non-labor. So I've shown you the labor, I showed you the expenses, but the non-labor and materials are very similar to what I did with the resources with the labor in this example. Now, all of this is able to do a lot of the heavy lifting so that we can run a variety of reports. Now, you can run the reports from P6, but you might find pushing the data out to Power BI or Tableau, whatever your corporate standard reporting tool is going to be even more effective, because the costs and where we're going astray on the costs, it needs to be seen by everyone, not just the schedulers, right? So project managers need to see it, maybe procurement folks need to see it, maybe third-party clients need to see it. So that data you want out to others. Okay, so what we do is we use our let's just see what the best way is to show this. So we use our snapshotting and our reporting tool to send that data out. So just not sure which layout is going to be best here. The snapshots are very simple. So you have a field similar to the Go to tell it to do a snapshot. And the idea here, rather than using P6 live data, which can be very dangerous, okay? So you guys are schedulers probably. You know that the project schedule moves around a lot on a daily basis. So since you want the costs at the time the update was done, so it could be monthly. Ideally, we're doing it every 2 weeks or even weekly. That'd be even better, because the more data you get, the more often, the better it's going to be for your team. So you run out a snapshot, and then you can actually use that in different dashboarding. So a snapshot in this case is a report date. So these are monthly. So every time I do an update, I've done my percent completes, I've validated my remainings, I take a snapshot. So some of you might do baselines, but the idea here is we're snapshotting it into a warehouse, our data warehouse, which is made simpler to work with for reporting. So it's denormalized and it's made much easier for reporting. And then you can get all sorts of great different dashboards out. Okay, so in this case, I've got different charts that I can put together, and I've got the ability to see sort of the percentages here in this example. I can see different curves. So of course we want to see what's going on with the projections and the curves. So the plan versus the remaining, and whether I'm going to be over or under, that's a key thing. And then we want to see it by cost account. Okay, so this gives us the ability to start to group things together, because the cost account structure usually has some smarts to it. So I've got equipment and labor split out, and materials split out. So now I can start to do different kinds of filtering and changing these graphics. Okay, so this is the benefit of grabbing the data, getting it out to a warehouse, and then putting it up to a different charting system that your team already uses. Okay, that's really the key. And you can create different graphics in all sorts of different fashions. They can be on different projects. They can be on different snapshots. They can be multiple projects at once. Okay, so in this example, I can't. It's only one at a time, but you can have multiple projects. So that's really the benefit of these sorts of tools, getting that data into activities, onto the activity level, onto the resource expense level, so you can split out the different costing. And in this case, I can see resources. You could split out expenses as well. Okay, so this brings a lot of dynamic value in the different reporting that you want to show the team. Okay, I think I've given you a broad idea of some of the things that we've done related to costing with different clients. And just to, again, to spark some interest, to show you different ideas of things you can do with P6-Calculator. If you have any questions, if there's something you want to explore, go ahead and throw it into the questions and I will try and answer it. And I'll come through and do a bit of a wrap up. So, you know, we've done different scenarios for many different clients, and they're usually integrated. It's usually a client who decided they want systems integrated so they can really see everything in one place, report it out in one place, have a very simple way to do the forecasting rather than a complicated system where you got to do all sorts of different things with forecasting. So the key thing that we found is it's the effort, the user effort is really reduced. Okay, so it's very efficient. You have a handful of forecasting elements you need to put in, and it's very, very quick to use. So that's really the key benefit. If it's not, you know, we've missed the mark. That way we've got automatic stuff happening, statusing, flagging, as I showed you, happening immediately. So the ability to have the data now snapshotted and then pushed up into P6 Reporter via P6 Reporter to your reporting engine is key. So the visibility is there. So now you can start tracking KPIs. And the KPIs and heavy lifting can be done right in P6. So you have that audit. Some of our clients choose to do some of that in the reporting engine. I find that's a weak strategy because you can't see it and you don't know if it's wrong. Okay, so there could be reasons where the calculations are incorrect. So having it done in P6 where the scheduling cost control team can see it and touch it, I think is very, very important, very valuable. And then reporting, as we mentioned, so the reporting coming out. Now, the other benefit is the accuracy. The accuracy and the consistency across the projects is there. And then you can start to track projects against one another. You can track the resources from each project against one another. So you can see, well, on these projects, this particular resource is doing well, and on these ones, not. What's going on? What's happening? Why? What are we struggling with? What needs to be fixed? So that gives you some food for thought. So in terms of case studies, well, as I mentioned, we've rolled this out to electrical utilities, contractors, engineering firms, manufacturing firms, mining companies, drilling companies. Those have all benefited from P6-Calculator and costing with P6-Calculator. Okay, so hopefully you saw something of interest. If you're here, you're maybe trying to understand whether or not P6 can help you with some costing. So we can explore that further, absolutely. I mentioned, of course, Calculator, and I've mentioned some of the other tools that we have in our toolkit. So if you're not aware of what they are, explore our website. We've got many different tools that we built for P6 to make using P6 better. So I showed you P6 Loader very, very briefly. And if you do a lot of work in Excel, this could be a very good one because we can hit pretty much all the data in P6 with the loader. Now that's pushing it into P6 as well as taking it out. And when we take it out, we take out multiple projects in one sheet, which is a big difference from what P6 can do. Plus, we can grab all the global data. We've got updating tools. So I mentioned our CAPS tool. We also have barcode scanning, TAPS tool. Take a look at our website. If there's gaps in how you're using P6, we may have filled some of the gaps with one of our tools already. All right, so at this moment, I don't see any questions just yet. So if you have any, go ahead and throw them in. If not, and they come to you after the webinar, that's fine. You've got my info there. And if you're in a region where the Philippines is a better time overlap, we've got our manager there, Donna Ureta, who you can reach out to as well. Now, if you do have some ideas on how you want us to follow up, you can go ahead and put that in the last little question I threw on the screen. That way we know how to keep in touch and we're using your time efficiently. So I'll stop